G'day, I'm Wiz and welcome back to Auslan Studios. Today's tutorial is looking at routing on the aw4416. It's a question that comes up continuously on the news groups and is one of the most difficult things to understand about the aw4416. It's very flexible and it's also very complicated. So let's have a look at the tutorial and I'll see you at the end. The aw4416 is a fantastic machine, endlessly flexible, but with that flexibility comes a level of complexity. The aw4416 certainly hasn't been aimed at the newbie home recordist. With some time and effort though, the AW can become your best friend instead of your arch enemy. The aw4416 is essentially a complete recording studio in a box. The AW comes standard with 8 preamps and A to D converters. It has a 24 input mixer. It has 2 expansion slots where you can purchase optional cards like an MY8AT card, which gives you 8 channels of ADAT/IO, A to D or D to A cards, or even a Waves Y56K card which has some of the Waves plugins as well as an ADAT/IO on board. So the design architecture of the AW is a 24 input mixer feeding a 16 track hard disk recorder followed by a 16 channel monitor mixer, all feeding a stereo bus. So aside from the 8 preamps and A to D converters, it has compressors and EQs on just about every input and output, 2 complete effects units and 4 assignable Omni outputs. Combine this with the AW's ability to route just about anything to anywhere, and things are going to get a little complicated. The best way for me to explain routing is to just show the typical setup for a particular song. Remember though, and it bears repeating over and over again, that the basic design of the AW is a 24 input mixer feeding a 16 track hard disk recorder followed by a 16 channel monitor mixer, all feeding a stereo bus. The instrumentation on this particular song is going to consist of drums, bass guitar, 2 electric guitars, an acoustic guitar, 1 vocal part, and a stereo Hammond B3 part. The time to start planning for mixdown is right now. Use a logical sequence during your setup and your planning stage, and everything will flow freely from there. So with that in mind, I'm going to mark up the desk like this. I'll have 4 tracks of drums, starting with overhead left and overhead right, followed by the kick drum, the snare drum, then we'll have the bass guitar, then I'd like the acoustic guitar, then I'd like the Stratocaster guitar, followed by the Les Paul, then my vocal, and then the stereo B3. This gives us a total of 11 tracks for this song. Seeing though the AW comes standard with 8 preamps and A to D converters, I thought it makes sense to split this up into 2 sessions, with the first session us recording the first 8 tracks, and the second session overdubbing the vocals and the B3. So our first step is to plug everything we need to into the AW. I think it's best to set things up with mixing in mind. Follow a logical sequence with your patching and routing and life will be a lot easier. I would make my connections like this. The overhead left mic cable would go into the first AW preamp, AD1. Overhead right into AD2. The kick drum would then be plugged into AD3, the snare drum into AD4, the bass guitar DI into AD5, the acoustic guitar into AD6, the Stratocaster into 7, and the Les Paul into 8. The reason the drum overhead mics have been plugged into AD1 and AD2 is to take advantage of phantom power. The mics that I'm using for the drum overheads require phantom. So then I would label my desk so it looks like this. With the AW, you can always be guaranteed that there's more than one way to do something, and that goes true with routing. You could use the quick record function, but I suggest you don't do that. I suggest that you get to learn to use the setup patch in page. It's a place where you can view all the connections you need to in one spot. So we need to push the setup button followed by the F1 function key. The setup patch in screen is where you decide which A to D converter preamp combination or which of the option slot inputs, if you have option slot cards, are routed to which mixer channels. You then decide which mixer channels will feed the hard disk recorder inputs. Hard disk recorder tracks 1 through 16 always feed monitor channels 1 through 16. You don't have any control over that, so you don't have to worry about it. On the screen you can see at the moment that mixer channel 1 has AD1 assigned to it, mixer channel 9 has slot 1 assigned to it, and mixer channel 17 has slot 2 assigned to it. As we plug the left overhead mic into AD1, that would mean that with this setting, it's routed to mixer channel 1. If I was to change this to AD3, what do you think would be routed to mixer channel 1? That would be the kick drum microphone. If you don't understand that, maybe stop the video for a second and have a think. As we continue to scroll through the options available to us with mixer channel 1, we can see that we can send any of the options slots, the SPDIF left and right inputs, the metronome, or any of the 8 sample pads. But what we want is we want mixer channel 1 to have AD1, mixer channel 2 to have AD2, mixer channel 3 to have AD3, and so on through to channel 8. Now let's cursor down to the bottom of the screen where we have our recorder track input assign section. This is where we decide what we will send to each of the 16 hard disk recorder tracks. The options that we have available to us here are direct 1 through 16 and bus 1 through to 8. We're going to use direct. You would use bus if you wanted to combine more than one instrument to one track at a time, not something that I generally do. Direct 1 would mean that it gets its signal directly from mixer channel 1. Direct 2 would mean that it gets its signal directly from mixer channel 2. So what we want to do is set up hard disk recorder track 1 to get its signal from direct 1, hard disk recorder track 2 to get its signal from direct 2, and so on through to 8. Now push the utility button followed by the F2 key. Remembering that we set the hard disk recorder track inputs to direct 1 through 8, we now have to decide the direct out extract position. If you cursor across here, you will see that you have 3 options: pre-EQ, pre-fader, and post-fader. For the way I like to work, I leave it set at pre-fader. This will be the subject of another tutorial on what these 3 things mean. For the moment, leave it set there, and if you're really keen, you could read the reference manual on that particular section. At this point, it's a good time for gain staging. Get the band to run through the song, adjust your preamp controls so that as the instrument is playing at its loudest point, it only just lights the peak light, and then you back it off just a hair and you're all good to go. Now you need to press Home and the input layer and turn on the first 8 channels. Now arm the first 8 tracks of the hard disk recorder. Now push the Home button followed by the Monitor layer button. Now turn on the first 8 monitor channels. Have the band run through the song, and you can set up a monitor mix, knowing that any fader or pan changes you make here are post hard disk recorder and have absolutely no impact on the recording whatsoever. Set up your monitor mix how you like it, hit record, and record your song. With the basic tracks out of the way, it's time to overdub the vocals and the keyboards. Unplug everything and then repatch your vocal lead into AD1 and your B3 into AD2 and 3. In the Setup Patch In page, make sure that channel 9 of the mixer input assign is set to AD1, channel 10 is to AD2, and channel 11 is to AD3. Your hard disk recorder settings should be track 9 to direct 9, track 10 to direct 10, and track 11 to direct 11. Turn on monitor layer channels 9, 10 and 11 so you can hear your new instruments, and make sure that the only input mixer channels that are on are 1, 2 and 3, the 3 things that we're recording. Gain stage appropriately, and then you're all set to go. Well, I hope that gets you up and going. It's quite a difficult subject, and it's been a very difficult process making this tutorial, trying to make it as clear as possible. I hope I've covered enough to help you understand routing on the aw4416, or at the very least to encourage you to get in there and have a go. Remember, the reference guide is always there to help you. Please check out my website www.auslandmusic.com, where you can find some information about how I recorded my album. There's lots of tips and photos and things there. You can also pick up a copy of the album if you don't have one, which I encourage you to do. And until next time, happy tracking.